The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's session, which is presented by ResultWorks and Astrix Business. Today's topic that we're going to be covering in our live webinar is addressing T-cell tracking challenges in cell therapy clinical trials and is presented by Bob O'Hara. It's my pleasure to welcome everybody today, and my pleasure to, of course, welcome Bob, which I'll do in just a moment. You can go to the next slide, please. Before we get into that, I do want to take a moment. If you haven't participated in any of the Astrix webinars, which we've been running as a series over the course of, we are now in year 2, where we've been bringing together thought leaders throughout the lab informatics space, both from Astrix point of view, from our, from companies like ResultWorks, which are part of the Astrix family, to a wide array of vendors in the space that we work with through partnerships. We've been, bringing experts in to really kind of lend their vision on where certain elements of this space is going. Why we do this, who are we as a company? If you're not familiar with us, well, for about 25 years, we bring a unique breadth of very specialized services, process, and technology, which has enabled us to become a leading partner in transforming the way science-based businesses succeed. A couple of fast facts about the company itself. We were established in 1995 and are vendor and platform agnostic, meaning we work with a lot of different platforms. We work with a lot of different technologies. We're not specifically aligned to one. We come in and help companies establish their tech stack based on a broad spectrum of knowledge in our space. Locations in the US and overseas and 1,200 employees. 90% of those are holding advanced science degrees. We are a science-based business. Headquarters are in Red Bank, New Jersey. In terms of who we're helping, startups through Fortune 1000, life science enterprises, chemical and CPG companies through government agencies and research institutions. And we go to the next slide. And just to kind of give you a sense for that total scope of services, we like to say that we support the continuum of scientific operations and data management. And really what that means is we begin oftentimes from a strategic perspective, which is where a lot of the work that ResultWorks does comes in, strategic innovation and roadmaps, enterprise architecture, really helping companies understand, what are those transformative strategies and technologies, what are they going to look like to help them get them, to the next level or get them set up for future growth and scaling. Enterprise architecture, what are the technology and data architecture that are going to be required to move your business forward? Data management and governance, in making sure that you're implementing strategies and methods and frameworks that are going to deliver the right intelligent insights. Business analysis, ensuring the people and process and technology are in place. Through solution selection services, development implementation, more of the traditional services that you think of when you think of a technology services company. We help you pick the right technologies, put them in place, test them, validate them, and then one of the unique add-on services we provide, because we do have a history as a staffing company, is we can staff both scientific personnel as well as technical personnel to help you run these systems and help grow your business. So that's a little bit about Astrix. We'll shift gears now, and I want to take a moment and introduce our speaker for today, which is Bob O'Hara. Bob is the Vice President of Business Development at ResultWorks, which again is an Astrix business. We're thrilled to have them part of the Astrix family of companies. Bob is an accomplished senior executive with more than 35 years of experience building leading organizations, which include professional services, product management, as well as software development. He's managed organizations and projects which have provided information technology solutions, including R&D informatics, laboratory systems, clinical information management, supply chain management, process and manufacturing management. So a very broad scope of systems and technologies that Bob has touched. And with that, Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will come back on at the end to wrap us up.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kevin. And I'm so happy to be here today, and I've been looking forward to this presentation. Just a word about the presentation and the content. This is based on an initial strategy project that ResultWorks conducted for one of our clients starting a few years ago. Most of the strategy work was done in that initial year, but in the years since, solutions were defined, they were selected, implementations were conducted based on a multi-year roadmap that is part of this, and we'll be talking about this as part of this presentation on cell therapy. So today we'll be addressing the cell therapy business challenges. I just want to set the table for the kinds of unique things that the cell therapy business finds challenges in. We'll be talking about the cell therapy process, from patient to patient, and all the manufacturing processes in between. We'll be talking about T cells and vein-to-vein sample tracking. I'll dive into some of the technology options that companies considered and that this particular client considered. And then we'll wrap it up at the end with T cell tracking takeaways. So hopefully that meets everybody's expectations, and thank you for participating. So just a little bit of background on cell therapy. As the diagram here indicates, there's kind of business challenges and there's operational challenges that cell therapy businesses have. That's kind of different from traditional therapeutic products. It's more complex. There's more challenges. There's more things to track. Business influences, in particular, the personalized nature of many of the cell therapies requires strict regulatory controls. The starting material is coming from a patient, and therefore that starting material is always different from one another. So this creates scheduling challenges as well as the material challenges, and can kind of wreak havoc on some of the manufacturing scheduling and capacity planning that needs to go into play. The end-to-end visibility across the supply chain is also critical. So the chain of custody, chain of identity, chain of condition, chain of custody being the sequence of steps or processes or moves, transfers that the material have gone through, chain of identity, the material being tracked back to the original patient, and the conditions that the material has moved through, temperature conditions, for example, being one of those. Also, new facilities face pressure to identify and prioritize technology that they need. So with new startup companies, they may have no technology in place and be doing everything very manually. Larger pharma companies that are in the cell therapy businesses may have technology that they can adapt. And then the lack of mature commercial solutions in this space. People are still learning, companies are still learning, vendors are still learning. So this is not always straightforward. Operationally, the cell therapy businesses have traditionally evolved with manual data collection and handling until you get to a certain point in the process, a certain scale, and you start to think about more automated ways of doing things. Business processes, the business capabilities that are needed to support the business today, tomorrow, data standards, technology architectures, IT strategies, often wait or get delayed until you get to a critical mass, and then you're accelerating things. So there's a timing issue in the cell therapy businesses. Variability of the starting material, we alluded to already, the patient cells makes standard processes very difficult. And then the made-to-order nature of the treatment impacts production planning. You have lot sizes of one, essentially, so you need to plan that way and be flexible in your manufacturing process. And then again, the requirement to maintain absolute solid chain of custody from the collection from the patient to the treatment of every single patient is critical. So that's the backdrop of the industry. For this particular client, they had a couple of objectives. The first being to define high-level business process and required business capabilities to meet their short-term goals, short-term issues that they had to solve, as well as long-term growth, thinking about scaling, thinking about moving from the clinic to commercial operations. And then also developing an information management strategy, architecture, and roadmap to guide the business. And again, be gated by short-term business improvements and thinking about scaling the business long-term. So both of those in play. And at the time we started this strategy, the client had many industry experienced senior people creating processes, identifying capabilities, putting practices in place to manage the business. People knew what needed to be done, and they had ideas on how to do it. But it was very much of a startup company that was already running a business, trying to manage clinical trials, trying to manage patients and be cognizant of patient safety. But they needed better definition and a strategy. So the approach that we took was to go through a business analysis. So we spent some time on the current processes and data flow, but we spent more of our time on thinking forward about how they wanted the business to operate. So much more important than continuing to try to operate it on spreadsheets or through manual processes. So a lot of time spent thinking forward and brainstorming with people, and then capturing that, documenting it, and getting it out there, and refining that. We also spent some time developing a strawman data and IT architecture that we reviewed iteratively and refined till it got to the point where it seemed to resonate and made sense for them, again, short-term and long-term. We developed a strategy roadmap that conducting a gap analysis, identifying the projects that they were going to need to tackle at different points in time, technology-oriented projects, and all of the things, the change management that goes along with adapting and being prepared for that technology, and then developing the roadmap itself. And then we identified a number of key projects, key technology projects that needed to be tackled right away. For those, we developed requirements. And then took them through a solution selection process, identifying potential vendors, conducting the selection process, facilitating the team to decisions and agreements on what the optimum solution was for any one area. So that's the approach that we took. Early on also, we developed with a client a set of guiding principles, and these principles are largely still being used to make decisions as they think about new technology investments. And I'll just jump on a few of these highlighted and bolded. Appropriate business needs and key milestone triggers. So what do we need for the business today? And what are the milestones that we need to achieve to make that investment in a certain technology? It could be funding milestones, it could be clinical milestones. So marrying the two things together and making sure that we're funding the right things. Quality and patient safety being primary considerations. So patient safety is really preeminent in this space since we're handling patient samples directly. So that was always an overriding concern. Solutions need to be right-sized and fit for purpose. So does the solution map to the way that we are trying to run the business? And will it not only meet our needs today, but as we scale and take on more and more patients, more and more clinical trials, and eventually move into the commercial world, is it going to serve our needs still? And then IT aiming to establish a flexible platform, flexible solutions, kind of platform-oriented mentality to make sure that everything fits together at the end of the day, and not just buying random technology that doesn't necessarily isn't thought about ahead of time to see how it's going to fit together. So we're trying to do everything in a more integrated way. And then finally, a data-centric approach, thinking about the data that needs to be collected, how we're going to manage that data, how we're going to move that data, who needs the data. So data very much as an asset and managing it as such. So these were the things. You can browse through the rest of these, all good thoughts, all good things to keep in mind for anybody going through a technology investment in the cell therapy area. So one of the first activities we did was to come up with a high-level process framework, and this is a little bit of a generalization of that, but just to give you a reference point, typical cell therapy process, thinking about a lot of the upfront patient things that are happening, the patient recruitment and screening being tied very, very closely with product ordering and scheduling, and then with production scheduling. So need to be thought through in a very integrated way. And then that generates thought about the T-cell collection process, transport of the apheresis, and then the apheresis material receipt and preparation once it reaches the sponsor company, our client in this case. Then also materials planning and sourcing, along with the vector manufacturing and inventory management, another set of processes that need to be delved into. Then the product manufacturing and product testing, release, shipment, and then ultimately back to patient infusion and monitoring the patient and determining how the patient is doing with the treatment. So lots of processes to be managed, lots of processes that needed to be dived into. So, which we did. So taking things down a level, we did a lot of detailed process modeling work, thinking about the leukapheresis ordering and scheduling process. We developed swim lane diagrams, defining what part of the organization was responsible for what systems were either used or were needed in order to drive a particular process, then the data that is either needed for a certain process or being created as a result of a process or used by other processes downstream. So all of this lined out very, very meticulously. Manufacturing processes, thinking about the physical material moving through the manufacturing process, inventory issues around that, quality control issues around that. So all of these things were identified and mapped out in very detailed process maps. That led to thinking holistically, as we have all that in place, how does everything need to work together, and what is kind of the technology stack that's needed to support this? So we worked actually quite iteratively with the client team in evolving to pictures about the architecture, and here is a generalized example of that, kind of based on manufacturing layers for monitoring, control, dealing with the instruments and equipment interfaces, and laboratory instrumentation, manufacturing instrumentation and equipment. Level 3 for manufacturing operations management layer for quality management systems, manufacturing execution systems, for example. And then level 4, the business planning and logistics layer, things like ERP and product lifecycle management systems. And then at the top here, you see the vein-to-vein process orchestration and tracking. So really the most critical piece to this, the piece that's closest to the patient and the clinical site in this case, and how that interaction works with other external systems. We move from there, and again, this is the big picture. I'll drill into the details around sample tracking shortly, but I just want to give you the big picture view of what was going on here. We developed a roadmap for the client and with the client around certain areas that were more critical, manufacturing planning, quality control, LIMS systems, and you see here vein-to-vein logistics, supply tracking systems, and then various evolutions of all these things. So, lots of discussion and iteration on the priorities of things and what to do when, and certainly going to need an ERP system over time, but it's a matter of gating investments based on where the business is. So these are all kind of business trigger points as opposed to years. For example, business triggers, meeting certain clinical milestones or meeting certain funding milestones in the case of the startup company. So that's the big picture backdrop to the T-cell tracking challenge that we'll talk about more at this point. So first of all, there's a lot of different sample types that you tackle in this environment. Most notably, the vein-to-vein samples, patient samples collected for T-cell treatment. They're going to be treated and processed through the company manufacturing environment and ultimately returned to the patient for infusion. So that's the treatment. The biospecimen samples, these would be traditional clinical samples collected from the patient during the clinical trial. And you're going to do a variety of assays around that and determine how the patient is responding to treatment. We won't be tackling those in the course of this discussion. And then other samples. You're going to collect numerous other sample types during the manufacturing process. And then you're ultimately going to be storing some samples, biospecimen in a biorepository for downstream uses, other uses, secondary testing, secondary studies, and so on. So variety of these. We will not be addressing biospecimen samples, nor will we be addressing any of these other samples. So we'll take the vein-to-vein sample tracking. So again, in this space, it's a personalized medicine challenge. The supply chain really extends well beyond that of the traditional biopharma manufacturing. We are truly end-to-end. So we're starting with the patient, we're ending with the patient. So that those are the endpoints of this entire process. From cell collection and all the product administration points where storage, handling, patient identity need to be confirmed, reconfirmed to make sure that we are treating the right patient sample with the right treatment at every step in the process. Critical to that is the fully robust chain of identity, chain of custody. So we need to have traceability at various points in the process to make sure that we are compliant. And if not, we are potentially risking patient safety. And that's something that no one wants to compromise on. Also, a little bit more detail. So for every one of these areas, we had big picture process maps, and then we would drill into, in this case, vein-to-vein sample tracking. So think about the T-cell collection apheresis here, worried about some of the process steps, patient ID verification, the apheresis collection, labeling and tracking, treatment matching, courier ordering, and later tracking, as you see here. And then on the digital front, we're worried about manufacturing schedules or impact of manufacturing schedules, or feeding information into that so we can schedule it, getting information from the clinical site EDC or EHR for patient ID, treatment information, and so on. So for each one of these, we have kind of a process issues, processes that need to be captured and defined, and then we have corresponding digital integration that we need to worry about, the data that we're collecting, systems that we're connecting to or integrating with all along the way. So, initially a lot of this stuff is done manually, especially in a startup company. But as the business matures, as the process matures, it's really important to demonstrate systems capabilities, and they need to be defined and documented for the licensing applications, and should therefore be proven during the clinical trial. So you want to eventually work technology in, because whatever you use in your clinical trials, you're going to have to use in the commercialization process. So an end-to-end view of the entire vein-to-vein patient life cycle is critical to confirm what information you need where, and think about what needs to be needs a technology infusion or investment in order to manage it better. And there are emerging technology solutions that can integrate with some of these various IT platforms, track product logistics, and so on, that are really critical to the cell therapy business. In the vein-to-vein space, then, we also drilled down further into processes. Step 1, order leukapheresis. Step 2, leukapheresis collection. Step 3, collection shipping. So on. We go through every one very methodically, line out what needs to be done at what stage. This is setting up all of the compliance steps that we'll have downstream. Again, swim lane mapping to identify process steps, who's doing what systems are engaged, what data is being generated. So all of this is feeding into and enabling us to define the kind of solution that we're going to need. From a technology standpoint, thinking about this from an internal perspective, we have the vein-to-vein platform identified as one technology area that we want to invest in, but ultimately we would tie into an enterprise resource planning system. For this client, did not exist at the time, so you need to make some trade-offs as to how you're going to do these functions without having a system for ERP. Likewise, manufacturing operations for production and scheduling, capacity planning, batch lot traceability, manufacturing records, and so on, and QC LIMS and environmental monitoring LIMS. So these are all systems ultimately that you think about as you think about how you're going to collect, map, manage the data associated with the entire end-to-end process. Likewise, external systems at clinical sites need to be anticipated, and you need to think about adaptability and integration with those systems. And to the extent you're doing clinical trials at multiple sites, you may have multiple different clinical systems at each of those sites that you're interfacing with. So you need to work through processes and ways that you're going to interface with those systems or collect data from those systems. As we move further down into the process, then we have our processes defined. We have we know what kind of technology we're looking for. We spent time defining and documenting user requirements. You see here we have our business process use cases documented here, end-to-end process tracking, subject visit and manufacturing scheduling, and so on. We have defined in here how we're doing or how we need to have chain of custody, chain of identity managed. So our requirements are all specified in here using a lot of the same processes that we defined, the technology stacks that we defined, and then we go looking for solutions. So we looked at traditional LIMS, and some clients are very successful using traditional LIMS, but they have to be adapted. Sample tracking systems coming over from the healthcare industry or other viable solutions. Biospecimen tracking solutions we've seen adapted. We've seen sample tracking solutions coming over from other industries. We've also seen solutions designed specifically for our industry, for cell tracking, and then customized solutions that some companies embarked on from the get-go and developed their own software, their own solutions. And and there are trade-offs in that. You get more what you like, what works for you, but then the question is, does it last over time as the industry moves forward and people get smarter about how they're doing the business? Some of the lessons learned from commercial solutions, and our particular client wound up identifying a solution that was specifically designed for cell tracking, so that's what we used. But also know that commercial solutions and their teams are not always as mature as you might expect. They're not out there leading everything. The industry is moving very fast. People are learning very quickly, trying to adapt. But cell therapy companies are employing and being successful with a variety of these solutions and a variety of levels of customization in these solutions. But whatever the solution, whatever the process, the needs and the knowledge continue to evolve because the business is changing as you go, right? You're starting maybe manually evolving, you're scaling, you're going from single-digit patients to tens of patients to hundreds of patients to multiple clinical trials and hopefully ultimately to commercialization. So some takeaways in this whole process. Cell therapy companies mature and technical capabilities do become more and more essential to achieving the kind of scale, the kind of control, kind of compliance, kind of efficiencies required that ultimately you need to be successful to manage this. It's just impossible to scale for in a process where you have a batch size of one, lot size of one per patient to keep all of this stuff in check and to track everything appropriately. The cell therapy supply chain requires broader and deeper integration across multiple functions. So you're worried about clinics, you're worried about couriers, you're worried about in-house manufacturers, or in some cases, both in-house and contract manufacturing organizations. So a lot more to worry about than traditional biopharma. And then you have all of the other things that traditional biopharma need to worry about in systems as well. Organizations really are all unique, so you need to consider your own business processes, your own information capabilities that you need to support your processes and prioritize those. Companies, the startup companies, again, may have no technology available to them. Larger pharma companies we've seen being able to repurpose their ERP systems to handle cell therapy, their financial systems repurposed to handle cell therapy. So all of those systems can be adapted, whereas a startup company is investing in all of those things at the appropriate time. And then for T-cell tracking, you need a robust chain of custody, chain of identity, really critical for compliance and making sure that you're not risking patient safety along the way. And then finally, solutions specific to T-cell tracking, the so-called vein-to-vein solutions, are still maturing as the cell therapy business, the cell therapy industry is maturing. So that's all I have for today. I hope that's been helpful to everyone. Glad to have shared this with you. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for participating here today.
That's great. Thank you so much, Bob. I much appreciate it. And obviously, I appreciate everybody joining us in today's session. Before we stop the recording and break off for Q&A, I did want to point out a couple of things here real quick. If you want to have further discussions with either Astrix or the team here at ResultWorks about any potential projects that you have, we would encourage you to reach out to Michael Zakowski. He's listed up there on the screen, and its email is mzakowski@astrixinc.com. Michael will get you to the right people based on what your needs are. And obviously, Astrix is well positioned to be a resource for you in a variety of different ways. So with that, we want to go ahead and again thank Bob for joining us today and thank everybody for sitting in on this great presentation. We're going to go ahead and wrap up, and the session is now complete.